I want to welcome Dr. Leah to this interview. Dr. Leah, why don't you start with just a quick overview of who you are, what you do, and what you stand for.
All right, so I am a naturopathic doctor now in Tucson, Arizona. I focus on getting people well at the base level first, so working on metabolic health through diet, nutrition, biosensors now. Um, yeah, I don't know what else I'm supposed to say here.
No, that's great. So I'm gonna leeway into a little bit. I'm curious because I never asked you some of these questions, but when you were growing up, you mentioned that you bothered your dad to no end by asking why about everything. Was this so was this encouraged in the household? Like, were you specifically groomed to ask questions, be inquisitive, or were you one of those babies that just was out of the womb, was like just question everything, and your parents were like, all right, we need to give her arts and crafts and projects to do so she doesn't bug us all the time.
Yes, so I annoyed the hell out of my parents by always asking why. And my dad, before we had like Google, got me this huge freaking book of the big book of Tell Me Why that he would make me go in and look up answers before pestering him with more questions. So I came out of the womb really annoying, but it led me to where I am today because I question why to everything, even with what I'm doing myself all the time. So it's great
Amazing.
because I'm always learning. It's frustrating because you can ask it indefinitely.
Absolutely. I always remember there's like a stand-up comedian. He has a whole skit on like people don't understand parents until they have a kid. And then the kid just there's those days that just they ask why like 100 times and they're like, you know
Oh.
what? Just be quiet and eat your fries.
Right. You don't have to know why.
I don't have any more answers was his point. He's like, I don't know more things that I can teach you.
And I don't want to lie to you, so stop.
Yeah. Um, that was Louis C.K. I remember now.
Oh,
Anyway, going back to your upbringing, was it then encouraged for you to be inquisitive? Like, were your parents always like, this is great? And did they kind of push you to kind of learn more and go down these rabbit holes, maybe in good ways, like, hey, learn about science, instead of watching, why is this TV show so long or something like that? Like, was that encouraged to you? Because it comes through the way you approach your practice and the way you approach health. So I am curious to learn about that a little bit more.
yeah. Are you planning on having kids? Do you want one like this? I don't know. But
I mean, not like that, maybe, but maybe
but
like a
yeah,
nice balance.
it was very much encouraged. I mean, one, I annoyed them, so they would like try and keep things
Yeah,
around me to keep me busy. But
yeah.
anything I was interested in, they would encourage me to pursue it, and they never like pushed me into one realm. Like I was never expected to be a star basketball player, but they supported me when I played basketball. They supported me when I wanted to try acting, and they supported me when I tried fencing or horseback riding. So they did everything they could to let me try new things all the time.
Very cool. And growing up, was there an interest in the household for health and wellness? Was that something that was kind of rooted into you? Because you went down this path, and we'll get into a little bit more about your studies. But, was there ever a curiosity for you, or what sparked it rather, when you were growing up and inquisitive as you are,
Yes.
what led you down that road?
So my parents are very much in the like allopathic mindset. Um, And I really defended all of our animals in like, why are we giving them this tick thing? It says I can't pet them after. Why can't I pet them after? Am I gonna get a seizure? Why are we putting this on them? And my
Mm.
parents were super annoyed. They're like, we just don't want fleas, okay? Um, but I'm like, that really like focusing on that with the pets made me start looking at like, well, what am I putting in me and how is that toxic to me? And are there other ways? We grew up on like the typical American diet, I guess.
Mhm.
And it's like, why do I have stomach aches all the time? Why am I breaking out all the time? And then that geared me more to looking at food. But no, I was very much the black sheep in that realm of my family. They're like, just eat your hamburger and put the tick medication on the dogs and we're fine. Like, okay.
That's hilarious. So tell me a little bit about, so you grew up, you're inquisitive, you asked all these questions, you kind of probed, and that got you more inquisitive. I'm assuming that's kind of what led you to go to Virginia Tech for biological sciences. Is that an accurate statement, or was there more things that kind of guided you that realm?
Yeah, so I loved Virginia Tech. One, I just loved being outside and it was surrounded by the Appalachian Mountains. But two, everyone there seemed really open-minded compared to going to some of the more northeastern schools.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and open to questions and learning. And yeah, I guess that
Okay.
is your question.
What was your what was your biggest takeaway from studying there? Like, was during that whole curriculum maybe your top three, or like big realizations that you had that have led how you practice today, and or maybe things that you didn't know before that really opened your eyes to how medicine, healthcare system, how it should be approached?
Yeah, and so when I was getting my degree at Virginia Tech, I loved learning everything on a micro scale, and I loved learning about oncology in these different separated forms. But I felt lacking because everything seemed so compartmentalized within the sciences, which is why I added on the human nutrition and exercise program so I could see it all combined at like a macro scale.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really frustrated in going through pre-med with everything in this like micro scale and very compartmentalized without a true blending of things or how it could actually help a human. Um, so yeah, then I think that was a big aha, and adding on that second major helped me pull everything I learned in the minute scale together for human health.
That's interesting. I hear that a lot. Anybody that goes to pre-med or med says that everything is compartmentalized, like you said. Can you give us some more detail on what that actually means? Like, give like, is there specific things that are compartmentalized that you now go back and say, there's no context around this. It's just you execute on it, but then there's like, is there no review after? Does it not take into consideration other variables? Like, what does that actually entail?
Yeah, so for example, like physics class. Like, why am I taking physics? I want to be a doctor. And if I didn't add on that second major, I wouldn't see it applied to physiology and like the
Hmm.
dynamics of our blood vessels, or kinesiology and how our muscles use different structures as levers and how that impacts strength and
Hmm.
performance. Um, so if I would have not added on that second major, I would have only had physics, and it wouldn't have been until I reached med school to start seeing how it works within our body.
Hmm.
Um, Again, at the time when I was in school, biochemistry wasn't a part of the MCAT. So
Hmm.
it was not part of the curriculum of like the pre-med I was in. So
Hmm.
taking organic chemistry and chemistry, I would not have seen it at play unless I saw the biochemistry of it all, which also played into food and nutrition. So I wouldn't have had those deeper layers without adding more on, or adding that second major on.
So that's really interesting. Basically, what you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong, is depending on which classes and minors, majors you take, you're going to make certain connections about the body that you wouldn't otherwise if you chose different classes. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, so my just basic biology degree wouldn't have given me any of the further layers of like how this applies to humans.
Gotcha. And then you mentioned that you also took a Chinese medicine course, which changed everything in your words, not mine.
Yes.
What specifically is everything, and why did it change it so much?
I think I was already struggling a lot with my own health issues. And I was like sent to an ENT doc for my chronic sinus infections. I was sent to a derm for like, I thought I had like vitiligo because my whole arm was turning white. Um, I was seeing a GI doc for my like horrible stomach pain. I was seeing an
Hmm.
endocrinologist because they thought I had Cushing's because I just kept gaining weight. And my parents were like, "Hey, you're getting pretty chunky. What's going on? I think it's your hormones." So I was going to all these different specialists. And at that point, I was like, why am I going to be a doctor? Like, no one can help me. How am I supposed to go in this profession if I'm going to just not be able to help anyone?
Yeah.
So all of that was already happening. And then I took this honors Chinese medicine course just randomly. I was intrigued. And so I think if I didn't have all that happening, I don't know if it would have been so mind blowing to me.
Mm.
But then when I saw that medicine could be approached in this whole body, holistic manner, that's the first time I've ever like known that was even possible.
Hmm.
It was just like, oh my gosh, why doesn't everybody do this? It
Mm.
probably sounds so simple, but I've never seen medicine applied in a whole body way.
That's interesting. And you just touched on a couple of things I was going to ask about in more detail, which is you did suffer a lot of different things: PCOS, prediabetes, skin rashes. When was the first time, do you remember the first time you actually noticed the, like, obviously, like a rash is a rash, right? But was there a lead up to your body felt a certain way? You were 8 years old skateboarding and you felt fatigue, or was there these indicators before the major outbreaks and or visible signs of like, oh, you gained a lot of weight, it must be hormones, like, so those leading things, because you're very inquisitive like you said. I'm wondering, did you have this intuition or were you paying attention to things that were coming up, and what were those, if so?
I think at the time I was master compartmentalizer,
Mm.
and that is really rewarded in our society. So I just took on more classes. I was like, if I ignore my body, like it'll go away. I'll take more classes. I will run more ultra marathons. I'll run farther ultra marathons. I'll add on Ironman. I'm just gonna keep ignoring the problem, and if I keep
Yeah.
myself busy enough, it'll go away. Um,
Mm.
and so I didn't really learn what, like, I just, again, I knew things were wrong. I kept going to different doctors. I think it was a gradual lead up to everything because things feel pretty normal until you know what normal is.
Hmm.
But it wasn't until I moved out to Arizona and learned about how to apply nutrition to myself that I learned how good could feel.
Hmm.
So after just like continuing to get let down with doctors, I moved out to Arizona. I became a personal trainer because I was like, I can't be a part of this. I took my first food sensitivity test and actually like cut out inflammatory foods. And that is when like my skin cleared up, weight started shedding off, my sinuses became unblocked. I stopped having all this stomach pain and things just started falling into place. Um, it took another slap in the face for me to stop my like exercise addiction, which was also ruining my body. But yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
No, I did. Essentially, your answer to me was, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know exactly what, but I wanted to ignore it.
Yep.
Yeah, you were actually trying to out exercise a lifestyle that wasn't fitting you, which I think is a pretty common thing in America. Like you said,
Yeah.
just exercise X amount of calories you burn, you'll feel better,
Right.
which I don't think anyone here is going to negate exercise is good for you, but you can overdo it. You mentioned something I want to really probe, which was you did a food sensitivity test.
Hmm.
And I personally have done multiple of these myself, but there's two schools of thought around those, right?
Yes.
One is it's controversial because some people say in the scientific community, those don't matter whatsoever. It's not a true representation. There's no way to actually know. They're kind of bogus and it's a waste of money, right?
Hmm.
Then you have people who say it's like life changing. It's the best thing I've ever done. I don't care what anyone says. It works, right?
Right.
So well, first, why do you think there's those polar opposite points of view? How did those points of view come about? And then what's your take on those two arguments against each other?
Yeah, and so I think it can be really life-changing for some people because in general, our food sensitivities are going to show foods that are generally inflammatory anyways. And some people need to see it on paper to actually even attempt to remove it for 6 weeks to see if it is affecting them. And I think that's where the data can be really powerful,
Mm-hmm.
for people to actually see on paper that their body's reacting to it. As far as if it is legitimate, I question that too. But the more and more I've done them, um, the more it correlates if people have a ton of food sensitivities and it's foods that they eat a lot, which they get annoyed about. And people are like, oh, well, you're just showing immunoglobulins because you eat this a lot and that's normal tolerance to foods.
Yeah.
I don't think it's so much that, but I think it's a sign that there's a huge either gut health problem where their body can't heal enough. So the foods they're eating a lot are kind of getting through the cracks, or people are way overly stressed when they're eating, or just stressed in general, so their body can't make enough stomach acid, digestive enzymes, bile to properly digest food. So these like foods are being recognized in whole form instead of being properly broken down and absorbed in their minuscule form, like amino acids, which shouldn't be very recognizable. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. I think what's interesting about your point of view and the way you're approaching the answer is you mentioned a lot of different variables that actually impact what a food sensitivity is, right? So this is why a lot of people will say, well, the food sensitivity test is kind of bogus. Everything's related to your microbiome. So as long as you fix that, you can basically eat those foods again because the microbiome is optimal, right? And it's an interesting topic to discuss because you mentioned a lot of different things like, are you stressed while you're eating, because that's going to impact that food, right? And then the tests themselves are a point in time. So did I sleep terribly the night before, or did I eat a McFlurry right before I did the test, right? So it's like it's so hard to say, but the one thing I did want to broach here was, with all those variables at play, do you feel like it works because you're eliminating things, or let's put it this way, when you do these eliminations or you do these tests, which you've done a lot of them, is there very common themes, i.e., what's popular is like gluten, eliminate gluten, or like a dairy. So is it usually like 80% of the time it's a couple different foods that everybody should avoid and then try to get back in? Or is it actually that you see, hey, you shouldn't do broccoli, or like you shouldn't do eggs for a while, or what's your kind of experience in that field, understanding now that there's all these variables, right, that will affect those tests?
Yeah, and so the top ones I see correlate with the top 8 allergens that like CDC has put a watch for. So like soy, sesame was just added, wheat, corn, dairy. So those main ones, tree nuts, peanuts, are what I see more often.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure if it's because our diet is so high in those things that we aren't rotating them. Like we're not rotating our foods. We like eat bread and cheese for every single meal in some form. Um, and that's why our body's reacting to it.
Mm.
But I think I lost what your question was.
No, you answered it, which was basically, is there very common things that show
Oh,
up
no.
on most patients, right? It's not like a varying degree of things that are always different. You're saying it's a lot of the time very
Those.
much the same foods.
But
And you mentioned,
sometimes,
sorry,
oh,
go ahead.
sorry. I was going to say sometimes it is really weird ones. Like
Yeah,
I had one patient show really high for kelp, and kelp was in all her personal care products too. And once she
yeah,
cut out eating kelp and cut it out of her lotions, her dermatographia resolved, which was huge for her.
yeah.
But
That's
I will say those like higher sensitivities do also correlate to IgE in blood work through like LabCorp or Quest also.
mhm. So I love going down this topic for one reason, which is I love your opinion on this because I have some theories of my own. But essentially, do you feel like those 8 or 9 foods that you just mentioned, corn, peanuts, um, the 8 or 9 that you mentioned, do you think that we're actually a lot of people are allergic to those things at their root level, or is it that there's so many pesticides and GMOs and other types of things that they spray on those things? Is it maybe that we're having reactions to those? Because the things you listed are like the most heavily pesticized
Yeah.
foods. So when I read back studies, just for an example, I was looking at, peanuts grow in these fields in Mexico, for example, that nothing else can grow because they've destroyed the soil so much. But these can grow because they're GMO and they still spray them, right? So is it that we have an allergy to peanuts? Or is it that we're spraying these types of foods with so much of these chemicals that we might not be reacting to them? Do you have an opinion on that, or
I
have you looked
do.
into that? Yeah.
I do. I think a lot of it is pesticides. It's going to break down our gut barrier, make it more permeable.
Yeah.
It's killing bugs. It's going to kill our microbiome. So I think that does have a lot to do with it. I think storing things in bulk like we do and we're able to do in America, to prevent starvation, which is good, but it also grows a ton of mold toxins.
Mm.
And I think people react to that, and that has its own set of issues. So I think we're not rotating our foods. I think we are eating very heavily sprayed foods, high mycotoxic burden. And so I think it's multiple variables at play, but I think they all do play a part for sure.
Gotcha. So do you think if we didn't spray those foods, you would see a lot less reactionary people to them? Or do you also feel like even if we didn't spray them, then the natural fact of eating the same food all the time, the body kind of says, okay, you know what, we're having a little bit of an adverse effect. Let's switch this up. What's your opinion?
And so if they switch to, say, organic, but they have had mold exposures, they might react to that more because mold can grow better on organic foods because there's no pesticides. So it
Mm-hmm.
does depend on the person. Or say it's mycotoxin free and glyphosate free, but they're still working 14-hour days and super stressed and eating while they're driving.
Yeah.
I think they still could equally react, even if it's like the cleanest source of food. So I think
Yeah.
addressing stress first would be the first thing, because then the body can be more resilient and detox properly. But then I also think we should not have pesticides in all of our food. I
Yeah.
think they all play a part.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. I remember I read a study where it showed how people who ate pizza at home by themselves in front of a TV screen metabolize the pizza differently than people who were out having fun with friends
Yeah,
metabolize it a whole different way. And it was obviously more negative when you were at home alone in front of a
right.
computer than when you were out with friends. There's some caveat I'm going to put on that study, like obviously your thought on this, because I also feel like maybe if you're out, you're also walking around or you're standing up, so the movement could metabolize it differently. But there is the psychological factor of you're having fun, you're having a good time, your chemistry therefore is different than if you're watching a screen. You're just stimulated, and therefore, and you're eating this less than healthy food than something else, perhaps, right?
Yeah,
Not to say that pizza is unhealthy by itself, but I'm just putting out like a black and white example, or trying to get oranges to oranges as close as I can, right? So it's like, do you're saying stress is an impact. So even if you're eating healthy, it might not metabolize. Do you see that often? Is that something that you advise? Have you seen that help people a lot when you give them that clarity? I would love to hear from someone who does this day in and day out.
yeah. And so, I mean, social connection is a determinant of health. Loneliness is like an actual risk factor for
Mm-hmm.
health and longevity. But as far as like reducing stress, I feel like I shouldn't get paid what I do to help people be more human, which is like breathing properly, connecting, laughing, drinking
Mm-hmm.
water, going outside. They're like such basic human needs that people forget about. And
Yeah.
usually when I address just how to breathe properly, people's gut symptoms get significantly better. It's like I see a lot of docs like treating SIBO, killing SIBO, like just like, but then if you're not addressing the stress that led to poor absorption and whole food being digested by the bacteria that led to SIBO in the first place, it just recurs.
Mm.
And so I've seen just bare foundations go the longest way. But I have to throw in some things because people think that's too easy and cheating. So I'm like, okay, well, here's a supplement too.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. Basically, you're saying they don't believe it can be that simple.
Yeah,
That's
and it is.
interesting. All right, well, we basically solved health then. I mean,
Right?
we don't need to do anything
Breathe
else, right?
and laugh.
Yeah. All right, so I think that's a good segue to you deal with a lot of clients. So I wanted to touch on a couple of things there. Can you give us like top three reasons somebody fails to achieve a health goal or a health outcome through your experience?
Yeah. Top three reasons. One would be not prioritizing themselves. I
Hmm.
work with a lot of people who do everything for everyone else, and it's kind of an addiction. I don't know if it's like they don't value themselves or they get such a high off of doing things for other that they won't take time to make food for themselves. They won't make sure they're getting 8 hours of sleep. So I would say prioritizing others' needs over themselves is a big obstacle to getting well. I would say not willing to give up the things that are making someone unwell, whether that's like in my case, a 14-hour day. It took me a while to just be like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore.
Hmm.
Um, so people just struggle to get out of the grind and accepting that they don't have to be this crazy workaholic. So people not prioritizing their own needs over others, people not willing to give up the grind to get well. The third thing, people not wanting to give up. And I don't like people to give up all great foods. Food is like cultural, it's emotional,
Hmm.
it's social, but not willing to eat well during the week and then just like enjoying their friends and doing whatever when they're out, but refusing to still eat clean when they're home. That makes it really tough.
Gotcha. And then on the flip side, we'll dive into those a little bit more. But on the flip side, are the top three reasons they succeed the exact opposite of what you just said? Like they do those three things, or is that actually different? I'm
Mm.
wondering.
I would say the top three things is yeah, they're willing to just like they're like enough is enough. I'll do anything to get well at this point, and I will like I know I need to get back to myself. And that usually translates to like, I'm going to prioritize 8 hours of sleep. I'm going to meditate when I wake up in the morning or whatever they need to do. I'm going to set aside time to meal prep. So usually when people prioritize their needs,
Mm.
everything else falls into place. Um, and yeah, being willing to learn new eating habits because changing your food is it's not just like, oh, I'm going to change my diet. It's like a whole lifestyle, hundreds of different habits that need to change. And when they're willing to do it, it they feel amazing.
Mm. That's awesome. It's interesting because as you're talking, right, I'm thinking to myself, what is that moment? Like, why does somebody actually make that decision where they're like, listen, this is not working. I'm gonna commit to something, right? And then just to like expand on that a little bit to give you a little bit more talking points, when they do make the decision, I think you would agree with me, it's not enough. After like 2 weeks, there's going to be a day where they're too tired. Somebody yelled at them. They got fired. You know, they got hurt. Whatever the case may be, somebody was mean to them online. It changes their state in a negative way, and the old habits can come creep back in. So, from your experience in coaching these people and helping them, when they make that decision and then it actually sticks, I'm going to assume yo-yo a little bit or like have off days, but are able to recover. So I'd love for you to, in your point of view, tell me if that's what you see or how, if you see it differently or what that difference maker is.
So I just want to clarify your question.
Yeah.
Um, one, what is the aha moment that I see in people?
Yeah.
And two, what helps with sustainable changes? And three, is it normal to not be perfect all the time?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So one, I mean, my personal aha was when I was getting rashes all over my face, and I'm like, well, I can't be this beacon of health if my eyes are swollen and I have like massive rashes. So I have to change. So that was my aha. Some of my patients, like one of them, for example, had to take care of her mom, and it was a horrible experience for her. And she is starting to show the same signs that her mom was. And she
Mm,
decided her aha after her mom passed away was she doesn't want to be that type of burden for her kids, and she wants to actually be able to enjoy her grandkids.
mhm,
Um, some people, it's a diagnosis, such as getting like diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. That's their aha where they get
mhm,
really motivated. So it's different for everybody. Um, like mine was vain, other people's are like for their children. But yeah, so as far as the aha, and then
mhm,
keeping people to it because life happens, I really love implementing two habits at a time, and usually like the lowest hanging fruit that we can decide on together that will have the biggest bang for their buck. So for some people, that's just taking a multivitamin daily, like a high quality one, because they're not ready to change their whole diet yet, but they're ready to start something, and that will at least give them broad spectrum nutrients until we can work on other things. And
mhm,
usually, with that, they have more energy, they're feeling better, and then over time, they're more likely to change other habits. Um, and then when they do slip, and everyone's going to test boundaries and like, oh, can I eat dairy again, even though I found out I'm lactose intolerant. Oh, no, I still have diarrhea. The enzymes didn't come back magically.
mhm,
So I think it's normal to test boundaries to come up and down. But I think when you're working with someone who can help you change habits, it's more sustainable and
amazing.
normal to not be perfect. Definitely normal to not be perfect.
Yeah, that's really great insight. When somebody does fall off, let's say you're building the habit, they fall off, they come back to you and say, hey, I feel bad about myself. I was doing really well. And then they get back on track and sustain it. Is there a moment there or something that you do, or how do you approach those situations to get them back on track? Do you have certain tools and what has worked in the past?
Everybody is so different.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, it's as easy as a mind trick where you just tell yourself you'll never do it 2 days in a row. And I heard that from, I think, the Mind Pump guys on a podcast once, and I've used it a lot for patients, and it works really well. They're like, oh, well, fell off the wagon today, but I won't tomorrow because that's my rule. And
Mm-hmm.
then at least they're doing things 3 or 4 days a week that they weren't doing at all before, um, with specific habits in place.
Mm-hmm.
Other things are, we get them back into tracking short term. So if they're tracking macros, it's like, okay, let's do that again. I'll never
Mm-hmm.
shame anybody for like falling off the wagon because that never does anything for
Right.
anyone. But or we'll just go back to the first thing that worked for them. If that was okay, just focus on your water again. Things will come back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I don't know. Everyone's so different in what they need. I don't really know how to answer that
Yeah.
question. Sorry.
Is it fair to say that you look for an anchor point
Mhm.
when we first started drink water, when we first started do the 10-minute meditation, when we first started you tracked your macros. So it's like go to the feel good anchor point. Is that accurate? Like because I felt like that was coming out.
100%.
Okay,
Yeah. And
cool.
it's like, oh, are you not prioritizing sleep again? Let's just start there. That's probably why you're starting to binge on foods again because your body's sleep deprived.
Yeah. The simple things that we complicate, right?
Yep.
As you mentioned. Okay, cool. I did want to touch on something that I know you've been working on a lot, which is relating blood sugars to hormones. Can you talk a little bit about that connection and why it's important?
Yes. And so I see a lot of women specifically for hormone health, things like PMS or like really intense cramping or heavy bleeding, PCOS, so polycystic ovarian syndrome. And
Mhm.
a lot of those are related to high insulin. So insulin is like a driving factor for polycystic ovarian syndrome, for endometriosis. Um, and so when we can get blood sugar under control, usually insulin follows and we can get hormones back into balance and relieve a lot of those like horrible PMS symptoms.
Mhm.
And so insulin is a driving factor for a lot of imbalanced hormones.
Gotcha. And that's why having optimized or more than optimal blood sugar levels is an indicator of, okay, this is going to balance those hormones in the long
Yep.
term.
And
Okay.
we're going to stop having painful periods. You're going to stop getting shaky and anxious around your period because now your body's a lot less inflamed and you can actually burn fat again.
Amazing. Do you think that one of the major problems right now from clients that you see is blood sugar levels being off? And if so, what's kind of your opinion on the cause of that?
I think we are overeating yet undernourished.
Mhm.
Um, and so we have really, really smart food scientists creating really addictive foods that play on our primal dopamine response system. So
Yeah.
as like a caveman, cavewoman, when our body needed nutrition, we would have dopamine releases to go seeking, and we would see a mango, we would eat it, it's really sweet, we get this reward system, and we get nutrients with it. Now when we need nutrients, we go seeking, and we have all this marketing in front of us for really delicious quick foods. We eat it, but we get the reward with the sweet, but our body still doesn't get nutrients, and then we just keep seeking,
Hmm.
keep eating. And so I think it's partially that is just we're not getting nutrients and our body's constantly telling us we need more, so we don't have like proper hunger cues anymore. We're just trying to get anything to get energy and we don't
Hmm.
have what we actually need to function.
Mm. So would you say that the way we've gotten with food production, marketing the food, scientifically engineering the food, making it easily accessible, would you say those are the things that make this hard for us in the modern day to regulate?
I think it goes hand in hand with us in our how we work now too. Like
Mhm.
we will work endlessly, and because we need money and inflation is going up and we can barely pay rent, like we have to go to things that are less expensive and quicker so that we can have more time making money. So it's kind of a whole systemic issue.
Gotcha. Do you have an opinion on if we could wave a magic wand, how would you change the systemic produce system and food? Magic
I,
wand.
that's I don't know. I would have centers of education for different communities to teach people how to have a community garden, because at least then they're
Mm,
getting fresh produce locally that they can go pick. So I know there's a lot of food deserts in cities. So if there could be
mm.
little plots of land dedicated with education surrounding how to grow your own food and make your own food and work with the community on it, that would be incredible.
Do you feel like that would override the scientifically engineered food that tastes so good and is so addicting? Like, do you feel like if we had a community, so you feel like you belong to something, you were more educated, so you understood what you put in your body and how it reacted? Is your opinion that that would actually start to override how much money and effort these companies put into making something addictive for you? and tasting good.
I think it's so fun to see people talk about how their taste buds change once they have committed to more of a whole foods diet for 2 or 3 weeks. They're like, holy cow, this carrot is incredible. It's so sweet. And they often find when they go back to foods they were eating, it's too much. Uh,
Hmm.
so I do think when you're with a community of people, so you're not alone doing it, 'cause a lot of times it's
Yeah,
hard when you're alone. Um, and you feel really good, it makes it easier to say no to those things. So I do think if people had the opportunity and gave it 2 or 3 weeks and weren't alone doing it, it would be a game changer.
very cool. Now, I want to transition to a little bit of a different topic with you. We're getting to the tail end of this interview, and I want to make sure I hit these points because I'm interested in your opinion, of course. Do you see a huge difference on age groups? How much they're willing to change, what they're willing to try, and let's just call it anybody millennial under as a age group. So like I guess under 40 now or like under 38. And then anybody over that. So the the boomers and everybody else who was older than that. Do you feel like you have to cater to them differently? Do they have different beliefs? Because we grew up, everybody grew up in different time frames and there was different types of marketing, there was different norms. So I'm really curious to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah. So I've been really impressed with our age group. They like don't have a lot of money off and they don't have like expendable money. They're not retired. They haven't saved up yet. They have kids and busy lives. And the ones that come to me under 40 are rock stars. Like
Hmm.
they're like coming because they know they need to change. They want to change. They believe in more of a holistic approach. And it's honestly way easier to work with them over 40. I'll say over 50,
Okay. We'll say
um,
over 50.
or over 45. It is a stark difference. And I'm not sure if I just need to like get more wrinkles and gray my hair out so I like seem like to relate to them better. I'm not
Mm.
sure. So I'm not sure if it's just my own age and how they perceive me and the weird like power dynamics or like I could be your mom type of thing, or
Yeah.
if it's they are just truly resistant to change because they've really grown up in the model of like here's a pill for every ill and
Hmm.
quick fixes and they've already tried every quote unquote diet in the book but they
Mm.
don't realize it should just be like a healthy lifestyle. um, so those ones are a lot harder to approach and with them it does end up being a lot more supplementation, um, because they're just not willing to change quite as
Mm.
much and until they get that like hefty diagnosis, but by then it's usually a little too late to really make their health significantly better.
Gotcha. And that would be something like a diabetes or heart, like kidney failure. So what would be like the definition of a hardcore diagnosis?
Like lupus, like once they're like full blown like
Mm.
lupus, which that can be addressed really well through food and
Yeah.
but yeah, kidney disease makes things really tough because you have to even be careful about certain vegetables you eat. Um,
Hmm.
Definitely heart disease, especially if they've had a coronary calcium score where they do show significantly blocked arteries in their heart. Like once the plaque is there and pretty built up, like we can probably chip away at some of it, but it's it's there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Last topic, because we're running out of time,
Mhm.
but good insights. You mentioned to me once that health is affected a lot by couples fighting.
Oh yeah. I meant to look up the actual stacks when I read it. It was amazing. So, like, obviously, finances are like a big contributor to stress, but most people, I wish I had the stat. It's a pretty high number, a high percentage, because I was blown away.
Yeah.
But couples fight and have the biggest fights apparently when their blood sugar dips too low. And so it could
Mm.
probably prevent some divorces if you had. a biosensor on you. That way you know it's like, oh no, my blood sugar's dipping low. Like, let's go eat first and then reconvene. So yeah, it was maybe I should look it up.
I will definitely have you send me that because that's a super interesting
Yeah.
stat. Yeah.
Divorces, major fights, all of that when blood sugar's too low.
Well, it's an interesting point, right? Because basically what you're bringing up on a broader scale to me is where your physiology is at will also dictate external things, how you're interacting with people, how you're talking to your spouse, how you maybe bring up an issue that you're having. Why did you do this versus, hey, I had something to discuss with you.
Right.
Would you mind
Right.
not doing it this way? Because, so, but alternatively, from what we've talked about, it also sounds like you have a strong opinion that external things will affect then your internal body too. If you're stressed and you're eating, it's not gonna, even if it's whatever, even if you're inhaling pure oxygen, it might still be metabolized differently, right? Yeah. So would you then say, just to kind of summarize that, it's you're always interacting with your environment and it's interacting with you, and they're equally impactful and important.
100%. You said that perfectly. So internal factors can also play a huge part in how you interact with the external environment.
Yeah. It's a real quick story. I had a friend who got really grumpy at one point, and I was like, I don't really want to hang out with him anymore. Turned out his testosterone was lower than 99.9% of women in the world, not
Oh
just the States. So it was literally like, I forgot what it was, but it was like, 3 to 900 is, let's say, the normal
yeah.
range if you want to go with that like public perception of it. His was like 30 or something. It was basically, and so, he did his research and he's on TRT, but then he came to me later and he's like, "Hey, I wanted to apologize. There was a time in my life I think I might have been not so cool to hang out with because my testosterone was off, right?"
Oh,
So I was like, "That's well, A, I'm like I commend you for like having that realization, right? And B, apologizing for that period." So it's really interesting because people don't actually realize what's going on, and you never really know what's
right.
going
What is
on.
it? Workaholics, where they talk about people being a wet serape. So if you're being a wet serape, get your hormones and blood sugar checked. There we
I
go.
like I like that a lot.
There we go.
Okay, great. I think we'll wrap it up there. Any last things that you wanted to share about either your journey or anything we talked about, or that you would want people to know?
No, I really appreciate your time and talking with you, and I'm super excited for continuing to work with Theia Health.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Leah. If you would be so kind to tell everybody where they can find you, how they can interact with you, like what are the best places to go to do that?
Well, I deleted my social media accounts, so you won't find me there.
Okay.
Uh, but if they're wanting to contact me, they can go to naturemedica.net,
Okay.
and if they want to work with me, schedule an appointment there. But other than that, I don't have social media. I don't know how people connect now other than in person.
All right. Well, you guys, we've put that link below. So if you want to go check out Dr. Leah, her work, obviously she's a wealth of knowledge, as you can see, tons of experience, really unique perspectives, lots of different things that she's looked at and diagnosed and seen and helped a lot of people, including myself. Actually, it's always a extremely good conversation with you, and thank you for what you do. We all appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'll clap for you. I love what you guys are doing, so thank you.